Hello all, this is Saurav signing in. And in continuation to what's new in 2023 release wave 1, today we'll talk about on-prem installation. So let's start that. Where should you start it from? Let's go to my blog where there's an article about how you can download Business Central 2023 release wave 1 for on-premise. Here if you read this, there will be a link to download uh, Business Central 2023 release wave 1. You click on it, you go to download page, you click on download, and then you choose the right product DVD based on the region or the country that you belong to. Uh, I normally deal with customers in United States, so I'll download the US DVD. If you are from any other region, let's say India, you can pick the right DVD from there. You can also pick multiple as you can see, and then you hit next and start downloading a zip file for you. Once the download completes, you extract that zip file and place it in your local drive. Now, one thing to remember, and this I have been repeating for all the installation video, that make sure that your path is as small as possible. You can also keep it BC22 on as easier path as you can. Don't keep the DVD inside folders and then subfolders and all, because during installation the file from this folder get copied to the right directories in your program files and program files x86. If the path becomes longer, the installation fails and you might not see a direct error message which will say, oh, because the file path was long, I was not able to install this component. So the best practice is to keep the DVD as near to the root directory. So I'm using my D drive and then I have a folder called INS BC22, but you can just keep it BC22 if needed. So once you extract it, rename the folder so that it looks smaller, because that also becomes the path, the part of the file location. So remember that. Once you're there, as of now, in my SQL Server, I have a BC14 and a BC21 and an app 2016. And at the same time, I'm also installing BC 2023 release wave 1, which is BC22. So what you are going to do, you'll right click on the setup and run it as administrator. I'm using Windows 11, so just keep in mind Windows 10 is also supported. If you haven't watched the system requirement video which was posted yesterday, just go to my YouTube channel and see that. I'll try to add the link somewhere here. You'll see a pop-up about it. So do check your system requirements before you start installing this. Once you run it as administrator and you confirm the confirmation dialog, the welcome window pops up. Once you have the welcome window, you click on next, you read through the license agreement and you accept it. Now you choose the advanced installation option. I prefer not to install demo even if I'm maybe installing most of the component, but I would like to know what I'm installing. So I'll suggest to choose an installation option. Now here is the part. If you are doing it in a production environment, then you are surely installing these different components on different machines. So let's understand what's inside each component. On the client component, you get the web server component, which which makes available, install the Business Central component for Business Central web client or the Business Central app. So it will install the app and a browser link for you, which you don't need typically in a Business Central world. What the server component installs? It installs the server, which means it will install your service tier and also install the web server component, which is your IIS part where your website will be hosted. You might want to have these two on a separate server, and that's possible and that's okay. Developer, where you get more or less all the options and then you can choose, and we'll come to that. And custom is used if you have a predefined config. Let's say you are trying to create multiple servers. So on the first machine, when you install it, you we will have to define a configuration which you can save, and then you can load that configuration on the other machine directly. So your settings and other details remain as it is, and you just move forward from there. So what we'll do, we'll come back to the developer option and click on customize. Here, let's talk about it, what the components are. The first one is AL development environment, which installs the AL language extension for VS Code, which typically you will have. Then install the server, which means it'll install the middle tier or the service tier, which is used to run the services for Business Central. There is no MMC starting 2022 release wave 2, which is the panel from where you start, stop, and manage services. But there is a service behind the scene. And then it is also installing the SQL Server database component, which includes a demo database. And then the web server component, which installs the IIS and other things. So I'll need all of these. If you are doing it on a production environment, you should surely check what component you need, what component you don't need, and install the right component on right machines. If you want to go that route, let's do that route. Okay, let's see. So let's say on the first machine, I just want the SQL Server to be installed because my demo database will be installed there. So this installation, where I'm just installing SQL Server, is for my SQL box, where my SQL Server is. I'll click next, and I just have to provide very basic details, which is what is my SQL Server instance and what is my SQL database. And that's it. That comes from this option. If I'm not installing this and I'm installing server, then you will see a different configuration here, which is what is my service account, what is my port numbers that I'm going to use for the service, all different ports which are needed. Do I want to enable them on firewall or not? What kind of authentication I'm using? What is my SQL server, which it need to connect to? What's the database name? If there is an instance name and the database name, and then these are the public URLs. If I choose the web server component, I'll see a different configuration again. This time it will only ask for the details that are needed to set up the web server config. What support that website will be published on, so on and so forth. But right now, I'm going to go to development, choose all of those because this is for my development environment locally. I'll click next and we'll see the configuration. Now, this is my server name. This will be my instance name or the service name. My port numbers, let's change it because or let's keep it as it is. You cannot have two services pointing at the same port numbers. So I made sure that my previous versions already have a different service port. I'll make sure that this is allowed from firewall, the management service port. Coming down here, this is the client service port, which seems a little bit wrong in the configuration automatically for some reason. So I'll change it whatever it is supposed to be, 7046. 7047 is for my SOAP web services. I don't want to start it yet. Then this is for my OData. This is for my development, where I'll be connecting it to VS Code. I'll need to use this port number. If you change it, this is the default. Then you'll have to specify the port number on that. And this is for a snapshot debugging. Do I want to enable the debugger snapshot? Not yet. I can change it later. Do I want to add the client to firewall? Yes. And this will be my server name. This will be my database name. And that's it. Now, if you remember, I said in the previous part, there is a configuration load part. So that's where you save the configuration. And at that point, that configuration kind of saves as XML with all these parameters set. and then in the next computer, you just load the configuration so that all these settings remain consistent. This is my default port, that's okay. If the IIS prerequisite are not installed, it will install them and everything should go correct. Now, as soon as you hit next, it'll start installing uh, the dependency for web client, which is the IIS component. So right now what it is doing, it is setting up the component and reviewing that the component are available or not for IIS prerequisite. Once that's done, it'll start installing all these components. What are those components? The AL development environment, which is already installed on my machine because I have Visual Studio Code. I'll try to install the server, which is adding the custom setting.config file on my local machine for BC22 services. SQL Server database component, you'll go to my SQL Server and add a new database called BC22 database, which is not yet available. And the web server component then adds whatever is required for IIS. Now the prerequisite for the web server are done, and now it is installing the .NET framework if it is missing. If it's already there, it will just bypass that and move ahead. But it seems it's installing it. So let's give it some time and we'll see what happens here as time goes by. So that component is installed and now it is working on SQL Server database component. So at any moment I should see a SQL database here. So let's refresh it. Anytime the database should come here because now it is installing Cronus database, and as you can see the demo database BC22-0 is available now. So my SQL Server component is kind of done more or less. Now it is installing the service tier on my local machine, which will add the configuration file as we all know. Let me see what it brings to me and I'll pop it somewhere else. Okay. So it should go to my C program files. And let me go there and I'll drag my screen in a while. It should come here and create a BC22 folder. On Microsoft Dynamics, and I can't see that. Business Central. Oh, that is 220 created, and it is right now trying to create the service folder. So there's no service folder yet because it just installed the web client which is needed for the configuration and all. It is creating even. It's not yet created. It's copying the file. So once this component, which is the server component, is done, we should see a folder called service here, which will hold the detail of connecting to my SQL Server at that moment. And as it is done, we will be able to move further from there. So let's wait for it and see how it goes. So as you can see now that I have a service folder here that popped up, and if I open this, this will have all the configuration files that needed, which also include a custom setting.config, which is the file that tells us where this service will be pointing to which database, what port numbers it will be using, that we have defined during the configuration of the service tier. Now with this service file, there will be a connection directly to this new database that's created. And right now it is going into my IIS. If I can open that, let me see. It is now trying to create the website for BC22. So now if I go here, I should be able to see inside my Business Central there is not one for BC22, but that will get created once this component is completed. So let's refresh this. Still creating, and it'll also come based on the folder that's created here for web client. There's nothing at this moment, so the files are being copied, and that's where it is important that the files from your local directory or your installation media directory kind of get copied into this path also. And that's where your file path becomes important, that you should keep it as small as you can. So I'll not see it unless I see content here. So let's wait for it. As the web server component gets installed, it'll add those files here. Let's give it a minute, I guess. It should be over by then. As you can see now, the folder started creating here. I can see the web publish folder. Let's check in IIS. Anything came here yet or not? Not yet. So that means there are more folders that are being added here, or files being added in this area. So it's at the end of the installation, and if everything goes well, we should have content over there, which is getting added. The modules get added here, and we should start seeing something here if I'm not wrong. No, we're still waiting for more folder to pop up or files to pop up here. These files are actually stored in your C inet pub, but then Business Central, for easy navigation, also creates kind of a shortcut in your Business Central folder where your services are mapped, so then you can easily navigate. Because okay, so while we were talking, the installation is completed. Let's refresh this, and you will see a BC22. So we see a web client hosted here. If you remember, we use the port 8080, so that's there. The web client folder is here. The service folder is here. Now let's understand how all these different pieces are connected. So your database is here, and in the service folder, there is a custom setting.config. Now if you open this on VS Code, that's our favorite tool for Business Central at this moment, you will notice that it will have the detail of the database server and also about the database name, which is this. So your service config knows the detail where the database is. And then based on that, it also knows what the service is called. It also knows the different port that you have used: 7046, 7047, 845, 86, and other ports that you have used. There are multiple ports and there are multiple settings. But then this file of custom config in your service folder knows the detail of how to connect to the database. But then what about the web client folder? If you come to this, there should be a config file again. I think I know that. Yes, nav settings. Now in the nav settings, let's open this one again. It'll have some details which will help this file or your browser to connect to this particular database. How that happens? The first service is what kind of credential you are using, which is Windows. What are these two different ports are needed for connecting to the database? So this port will be same, 7085, 7045. I think this came wrong, but we'll see that. Anything else? Okay, let's have a quick look. I don't think I see any other service detail here, but based on these two settings, it knows that it need to connect to this particular port numbers, and that's where it goes to connect to BC22. It's not here, but it connects to that. Okay, and that's it. So let's come here, and I think I have closed the installation. If not, let's close this and let's try to access this website. Okay, let's hit browse, and if everything goes well, I should be able to see a Business Central 2022 client running, and if not, then we'll know what happened. We'll try to figure that out as we go forward on this. So let's wait for it and see what happens. Now there can be, okay, it's here and it's still loading. If you can see this hover icon here, so it's still loading, and once it is loaded, you can always go into help and support and see what version you are connecting to, and so on and so forth. So while this is happening, let's do a quick recap of what we learned while this is happening. Okay, so your ISS component install based on which you get an access to a website via browser. So that's where it comes from. Let's just quickly finish this. So this is Business Central 2022, an application of 2022, and so on and so forth. So this website can be accessed because it's hosted on your IIS. The IIS hosting and the configuration of that, as I was saying, is actually stored, which I was telling you earlier, which I forgot, here on your CINET pub. It might be visible to you on the service folder, but the actual path for this is here. So all these files are also available in that service folder, but that's okay. The actual configuration is here. So here, if you look at the config files, which are these files, you'll see that on the nav settings, what we just saw, all the details are there, which is what server to connect to, where the server is, what is the service name, what kind of credentials you are using, which is this, and then what is your client service and management port, and so on and so forth. Now, based on this, it knows where to connect. If I change anything on the service or in this file, which does not match to my service, I'll not be able to access the website. So that's there. Now this connects to your service file, which is stored in your service folder, which is your middle tier of Business Central. And then there is a custom setting config, which knows the detail of the database that it needs to connect to. So the only connection to your SQL database happens from your service tier. Okay, let's do a quick recap of things that you need to remember. Do check the prerequisite video or the hardware or software requirement for installation of Business Central 2023 Release Wave 1. That's important. Second, once you download the product DVD, make sure that the path of the folder is as near to the root as it can be and as a small, so that the installation process can copy file from the disk installation media to the right directories. It's very important. Remember this, otherwise you might end up wasting so much time during installation. Third thing, make sure that the port numbers are unique and they are not being used by other services in your system. Like I showed you that I have different versions of Business Central installed on my machine, and every one of those is using a unique port number configurations. And last but not least, only you can install either all the components on one machine if you're just doing it for your development purposes. If not, then install the components on different machines based on the requirement of that server. If it is a SQL server, then only install SQL component. If it is a middle tier server, only install the middle tier. If you want to keep middle tier and the web server together, then install both on them. Otherwise, you can keep them separate. I think that's all we discussed today, and that's all is important. In the next video, we'll talk about how you create a empty nav or a BC database, which is again based on the request. But this is all for today. So if you learned something new, please do share this video with your friends and colleagues. If you're new to this channel, please do subscribe to the channel. That helps us to understand what kind of content we are making and are you liking the content or not. And then I'll promise you that I'll come up with the next video most probably tomorrow. So thank you and see you then.